Serious, what one memory would you remove from your mind permanently if you could? I was 12 or so, had to take a dump while at a birthday party. I went into the bathroom, sat down, started pushing, and the birthday girl's little brother opened the door and runs away. The door is 8 feet away, and I'm mid-turd extrusion. The 20 kids in the room are now hysterical, laughing and pointing. This goes on for 20 seconds until a parent walks in and closes door. Looking back now, not a huge deal, but in 6th grade it was cause for wanting to move. When I was 10 I was in bed with my dad. Sounds creepy but it wasn't. I was too scared to sleep alone, so he would let me sleep in his bed while I watched TV and then would eventually bring me to my own bed. Anyway, not the story. My mom and dad were going through some stuff, like always. Mom comes into the room. While we were watching TV, she was holding a sledgehammer she had gotten from the basement. She then proceeds to swing it right into the TV. This was 1998. It was a 30-odd inch court TV. The thing completely exploded. I was covered in glass and in shock. My dad jumped out of bed, threw my mom down the stairs, and locked her in the bathroom. He picked me up, carried me to the car. We drove to my nana's. When we got there she picked all the glass out of me with tweezers. There was so much. It was all my face, my arms and legs. My dad decided to go back home that night. My nana came with us. When we got back, my mom was in bed and pretended nothing happened. She had cleaned up the glass and was talking and laughing like we had returned from some trip or something. I went to bed, Nana came with, and we never spoke of it again. I went to school the next day and told no one. I didn't tell anyone about this until just a few years ago. It just so perfectly shows how unstable my mom is. No, not raid. Honestly, that's where my anxiety probably stems from. It's terrifying. Cops broke the door down and started screaming. Whenever I tell the story I make it funny, but nothing is scarier than a cop holding a rifle with a flashlight on it pointed at your face. I did get sent to prison for a day, but the raid was the scariest thing I've ever experienced. My dad is an alcoholic, and one of my most vivid memories of the worst of it was when I was about 8 and my brother was 5. I remember wanting my dad to just pay attention to me in a positive way so bad that I begged him to play wrestle with me like he play wrestled with my brother. I don't know why he wouldn't, maybe cause I'm a girl. We were all outside. My dad had a few friends over and was trashed. He was play wrestling with my brother on the lawn, talking to his friends, and in general just enjoying himself. I ran over and said, "I wanna play too, daddy. Come on. I won't cry, I promise." I remember distinctly pleading to my dad and assuring him I wouldn't cry. He kept saying no until I said please again for like the 10th time, drops his drink, and suddenly shoves me so hard that I immediately fall backward and smack my head on a sharp rock sticking out of the ground and bite partially through my tongue. Clearly, being 8 and in a lot of pain, I start to cry through the blood in my mouth. He leans down and looks right at me and says, "See? This is why no one plays with you. I gave you a chance, you fucked it up, and I wasted my fucking drink." This is verbatim, and I'll never forget it. He knew I didn't have friends, and I was always upset that no one wanted to play with me. He left me sitting there. His friends were disgusted with him and called my mum, I don't know where she was at the time, to come home and get me to the hospital. My dad just lets me sit there crying, trying to sop up my own blood with my sock cause he wouldn't give me anything else. My mum gets home, screams in his face, and brings me to the hospital. When she put me in the car to go, I looked over at my dad, who was leaning against his car sobbing, crying so hard that there were tears running down the window. I remember feeling so bad for making my mum upset and for making my dad cry, and I never asked him to play with me again. And he didn't. This past Thursday I accidentally drove over my girlfriend's puppy. I tried to do something, but I knew there was nothing I could do, so I held the dog and tried to comfort her while my girlfriend ran around into the house. I stayed with the dog until I felt her last heartbeat. It was all over in about 3 minutes, so I'm glad the puppy didn't really suffer. But the image of holding the dog with blood coming out of her head and her little tongue hanging out of her mouth, feeling her heartbeat fade away, and knowing I could do nothing will forever be in my memories. Back in 2007 I happened to be in Pakistan visiting some family. I had been there for 2 weeks and everything seemed fine. One night there is a lot of noise coming from outside. I was confused, no idea what it was, but my cousin told me it was an international cricket tournament that held great value in their tradition. I thought nothing of it and continued the day. The next day everyone was on edge, telling me to stay inside, so naturally I start getting suspicious. I do some research and find Benazir Bhutto, former Prime Minister of Pakistan, had been assassinated and heavy protests were being held. This was the source of the noise. Anyways, back on track. A few days later, men are going around knocking on doors, holding people at gunpoint. My uncle told me to hide in the basement, which is fairly well hidden, and so I did. I heard voices, but I don't speak the native language, so I didn't understand the conversation. They began searching the house, holding my uncle at gunpoint. Luckily they didn't find me, although I was absolutely shit scared and would love to forget it ever happened. I'm still unclear on their intentions to this day, as my uncle refused to give me explicit detail as he thought he would scare me and that I would never visit them again. Throwaway 4 reasons below. When I was 15, my best friend at the time and I were approached by his neighbor with an option to make a little bit of money. She said she had rabid raccoons living under her porch and she would purchase a cage, set it up, and when she captured them, we were to dispose of them for $20 each. As a 15-year-old boy, $20 was a lot of money at the time, so of course we wouldn't pass it up. The first raccoon was caught the following day. His neighbor came knocking, so it was time to do the job. I put some gloves on and carried the cage over into my friend's garage. We brainstormed some options and decided that the best way to do this was to fill a garbage can with water and submerge the cage into the can, drowning the rabid beast, and then put it in a garbage bag like it was trash. We did that to perfect success. Onto the memory. A few days later she came knocking. Another raccoon. I gloved up and carried the little mouth foaming creature to the garage. But there was a problem. It was trash night and all the cans were full of garbage. We brainstormed. Leave it in the cage and starve it? Shoot it? What do we do? Well, my friend had a little .22, so he went and got it, loaded it, brought it out. Bang. Nothing happened. The bullet bounced off his skull. Bang. Again. Now the sad part. Shooting this thing wasn't working, so I looked around the garage for something, because damn if I wasn't getting my $20. I see a gas can, so I run to it to see if it's full. There was about 3 gallons of gas in it, so I grab it and run toward the cage and literally use every drop of gas and douse this fucking thing like it was already on fire and needed water. I told my friend to stand back and I lit the trail of gas I made to the raccoon so it wouldn't be as dangerous. That cage lit up so fast, and after the initial burst of flames, the raccoon was the only thing on fire. The sound coming from poor animal was a sound that haunts me to this day, 25 years later. Most recently, I was walking my dogs and witnessed a little Yorkie bust out of his house into the street and get nailed by Ansav. Nobody was really at fault, aside from the owner possibly being more vigilant with her dog. I tied my dogs to a nearby tree to go and help. The poor little guy was gone. Thankfully it was instant, and he felt no pain. The image of his little organs hanging out one side of his body was horrific for me, and is still stuck in my head. I removed his tags to call the owner. When I went to put the tags back on his collar, seeing his little tongue hanging out of his mouth was heartbreaking. 10/10ths would like to erase this from my memory. I'd like to forget a woman who visited San Francisco for 2 weeks. I was asked to show her around. We fell in love, but she was going to Mexico for a year to improve her Spanish. Well, the long distance part didn't work out. I finally got to see her for another 2 weeks about 2 years later. She told me she didn't want me because I didn't do anything during those 2 weeks. Anyway, I've thought about her every single day since then, which is about 35 years. So I've probably spent much more time thinking about her than I spent with her. So if I could forget her, I would. When I was like 8 or something, I came home from school and couldn't find my new puppy. My brother and I were looking everywhere, and then we decided to roll up the pool cover. We were kind of laughing while doing it. We got about halfway through and saw the puppy floating at the top. I can still remember the way the puppy looked after being in the pool for a few hours. And I remember seeing my mom and my brother cry. It was a normal evening, about 9 p.m. My children were upstairs getting themselves ready for bed, and I was pottering around the kitchen clearing up while listening to the radio. There was a knock on the door, which was unusual for that time of night. 2 police officers were there, asking if I knew someone by the name of my ex. My heart was thumping as I said yes, and they asked to come in as they had some bad news. She was dead. She'd been found in her flat by a friend. She'd long had a serious alcohol problem, and her drinking was the reason we'd split up years ago. Part of me had always worried that she was eventually going to drink herself to death, but I never really expected it to happen that soon. The police asked me if I was going to be okay and recommended that I ask someone. I shook their hands. I don't know why, but it seemed important at the time. They then left to hopefully go and do a less horrible part of their jobs. And then I had to call up to my children to come downstairs so I could tell them that their mother had died. That's the memory I want to lose. Being woken up at 4 a.m. on a school day to break up my mom and my former stepfather's physical altercations, meaning they were fighting, you pervs, and screaming matches. One that sticks out in particular is when they were screaming and pushing each other because she found porn of women dressed like schoolgirls on his phone with one that looked like me, allegedly. Both of them are crazy, and I'm pretty happy to have them both out of my life, but I cannot get rid of those memories. Edit. Some context. I was 15 or 16 at this time, so not a little kid. Still too young to have to be the adult and blow the whistle for people twice my age, but old enough to know how fucked up shit was, and to not trust my stepfather or my mother at all after the fight ended, and he ended up staying for another couple of months. If she was scared for me, she wouldn't have kept him around. But she has a track record of putting her children in dangerous situations. It resulted in her losing custody of me and me being placed in foster care with my grandparents after several more incidents. I had a horse for 7 years. She was my pride and joy, and taught me more about myself than any person ever could. Unfortunately, she got a rare neurological disease that is almost impossible to fix. After staying up for practically 4 days straight taking care of her, I had to put her down. The memory of them getting her body was one I will never forget. They put chains around her back legs, and then a machine slowly pulled her massive body through the stall and up the ramp to lay on top of a dead foal that couldn't have been more than 3 months old. She was a mother long ago, and I hope that, if there is a heaven, that she will watch over that little one. When I was in the 8th grade, I went on an end of the year band trip to a mall after our final competition event. At this mall, there was a booth where you could make your own hat. The girl that I was crushing on was also in band, so she was at the mall walking around. I got the idea to get her a hat with her name embroidered on in chopstick format. She was Asian. WTF 13-year-old me. All the popular / asshole guys of the class saw me doing it and just pointed and laughed at me while I got this hat made. When we got back to the school, I gave her the hat. She tells me that it doesn't fit, drops it on the floor, then hurriedly runs out of the band hall. The hat was a one size fits all. I ended up giving the hat to my friend, and now I hate everyone. Not just one, but certainly related. I had a girlfriend when I was younger, 16 to 18. She accused me of raping her in some casual conversations. This, after many tears on my own behalf, was confirmed to be her way of getting more attention. This has caused me countless issues in the rest of my life. I'm certain she doesn't even remember the conversation, but please take this as a reminder that casual references that may mean nothing to you can make a huge impact to others. No one knows this, but I feel like commenting on a question that I can answer by commenting late. It gives me more confidence to do so. One memory I want to remove would be my mother got on top of me, choking me while looking into my eyes trying to kill me. I kept screaming, and my cousin ignored me and left for school while it happened. Eventually she stopped after I started screaming louder and trying to shove her off me and get some air. I was genuinely scared for my life. I thought I was going to die that day. After she stopped, she mentioned how she was thinking about getting rid of my body while sitting on her bed thinking while I cried. I forgot to mention this was because I didn't want to go to a new elementary school. She sincerely apologized the next day, but the memory will stay with me forever. I wish I could permanently remove the memory if I could. I've never forgotten the incident and no one else knows. We're on good terms now. 3 years ago, an officer came to the door of the home my sister and I share to inform us that there had been an altercation and my father had injured himself with a weapon. We rush for 2 blocks to our parents' house, where we encounter the first image I would like to be rid of, my mother sitting calmly on the bench in the front yard, her hands taped up in paper bags, staring straight ahead, and in so much shock that she doesn't hear us calling to her. When she notices, she turns, with no expression, and the side of her face that was away from us is 10 times its normal size. Her eyes swollen shut, and there's a definite line between the pale right side and the black and blue left. That look of shock coupled with the injuries and blood was haunting. My father had shot himself in the head and was taken by ambulance, as was my mother. The officers assured us that he was responsive when leaving, and that he got lucky. When we arrived at the hospital, we were put in a separate room for the doctors to explain the situation. They told us he was alive, but that they weren't sure if he would fight through it. A nurse walked us toward Trauma 1 to see him, alerting us that there would be some blood and machines. This is the image I would delete. My father hooked up to countless machines, his shirt ripped open, necklace broken, chest heaving in desperation. The chunk missing from the top of his head, the blood and brain matter caked in his hair, the wound under his chin bleeding through and swelling against the medical tape, pulling it taut, the blue swelling of his eyes, and the apparent fact that the left one was askew, knocked aside by a bullet. The jerking of his hands and feet as nerves, fired relentlessly to survive in spite of him. The tubing, blood, and cloth on the floor. The sight of the nurse crying as she watched my sister and I cling to each other in the moment that we knew nothing would ever be the same. I wish I could forget that. Ghosts are real, and sometimes we call them memories.